Hey everyone, welcome to Music as a Journey. Today's video is going to be a brief one telling you about the catalog, the album catalog of the band Voivod. Now I just did a three-part series, an in-depth look on the history of the band. It is a very lengthy video series with the longest video going up to like 48 minutes or something like that out of 3 videos. So what I want to try to do now is do something that is short and quick, which is something I do not do very well. But I want to try to start that habit. So, if you heard about Voivod, you heard about something from the new album recently, or you've heard a talk about them and you want to know more what's behind this band and their catalog. First of all, the band is from Jonquière, which is part of Saguenay, district of Saguenay, Quebec. They formed in late 1982. Basically, the 3 musician members gathered together. They actually had been rehearsing before. The drummer and the guitarist had actually been friends already going back to something like 1979 or so. But anyway, by 1982, the end of 1982, they officially decided to become a band and named themselves Voivod after a character that was created by the drummer. Now, all band members decided to take on special nicknames. So drummer Michel Langevin became Away, the guitarist Denis Demour became Piggy, and bass player Jean-Yves Thériault, he became known as Blackie. And then in January of 1983, they recruited vocalist Denis Bélanger, and he took the nickname Snake, and the band was basically complete then by January 1983. They spent 1983 doing a lot of cover songs, and then also writing some of their own material, releasing some demos, and then early in 1984 they released a full package of demo songs that came out as a demo called To the Death, which was finally re-released in 2011 on CD, and it's called To the Death 84. This is really like January 1984 or so, recorded in 83. This is a rehearsal studio space live recording. Live meaning all the members played together. Apparently they just had 2 microphones tied together in a cross pattern. And there are also some commentary in English by Snake, the vocalist, in between some of the tracks. Most of the tracks here appeared on their first album or their second album. There are some other things too, like there are some cover tracks, cover songs of a Venom song and one other one. Plus there's a song on here called Condemned to the Gallows, which did not appear on any of their albums. But this was the big start-off thing. This is a really powerful, like very loose and really, I don't know, explosive demo of a extreme metal band, as extreme metal was back there in the early 80s. This is unlike anything else they did, but this is the template or the foundation of what was to come. A demo was sent off to various places, including Brian Sliegel at Metal Blade Records, and he asked for Condemned to the Gallows to be included on Metal Blade 5, compilation of songs. The Metal Blade series also included bands like Metallica, Slayer, Flotsam and Jetsam, and tons of others. Anyway, that was the beginning, and he offered the band a contract, so they recorded their first album. Released in 1984, this is the first Voivod album. This is called War and Pain. The band members look back on this both thinking rather nostalgically, like this was their first time in the studio, a bunch of young guys, they really didn't know what they were doing. It's a very loose project here. There's a lot of like, sounds a lot like a rattling, clunking machine that is about to fall off but still manages to stay on. It is thrashy, it is heavy, but it also has some more slower, heavy, ominous parts. So it's a really nice arrangement. I really love this album here. I bought it way back in 1985 on cassette. I've loved it ever since. It was labeled as one of the worst albums, if not the worst heavy metal album of the time by Kerrang! Magazine. Even some of the band members say that it was, you know, pretty much a very rugged affair. But it is the starting point, Voivod's debut release here, War and Pain. Pretty cool. The Voivod character, by the way, this guy on the cover here, he is the Voivod character, and it is his story that we will hear about over the next few albums. Okay, that was 1984. Then they went through 1985. They already had a bunch of songs ready to go for the next album. They got a manager who really started promoting them, trying to get them in to perform different places, moved them to Montreal, and they moved into a new rehearsal space. All their gear got stolen almost right away. Then their manager put together a heavy metal festival type show, a one-day thing called World War III with Voivod headlining. Other guests included Celtic Frost and Destruction coming over from Europe for their first time in North America, Possessed out of California, their first time out of California, and Nasty Savage from Florida. Wow, huh? It was to increase the exposure of the band. And then Martin Ain from Celtic Frost brought the demo of the album over to Noise Records in Europe, and they said, hey, why don't we do your next album for you? And so they did. This here is Roar, Voivod's second album, released in 1986, this one. And this album here is much more of an intense affair. While the first album had some of these more atmospheric parts and change-ups in the music here, this is more or less a straightforward, heavy, in-your-face, extreme metal, speed metal type album. Very aggressive sounding, and more or less what you would see, imagine from the cover here, this roaring machine with the Voivod character driving it and machine gun fire and everything like that. That's what the album sounds like. Very appropriately titled. Very cool though. And that is Voivod's second album, Roar, which was re-released a few years back. Comes with a bonus disc of live recordings, and I think there's even a DVD here as well. So that's pretty cool. Okay, moving along. Now the band actually had to tour and prepare for their third album. So when they went over to Europe to tour with Kreator, afterwards they went into the recording studio and they put out Killing Technology, their third album. Now this is a big jump in change in the music. This is largely a thrash metal but progressive metal type album done in Voivod style with some hardcore punk type vocal styles. This album is really a big jump, and unlike anything anybody else was doing at the time. The guitarist Piggy is coming up with all sorts of interesting chords and riffs, playing very high-toned chords as well, while bass player Blackie is putting in a lot of the heavy side on the bass there. It's fantastic. Some people call this like one of the best metal albums ever. One person said that side 2 is just a perfect side. This is often considered either like the first, second, or third best Voivod album ever. This is Killing Technology. I love it. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. Even though it is really very different, perhaps it's because it is so very different. That's 1987. Right. 1988, the band released Dimension Hatros. Now, if you notice, the Voivod character in the last one went into space. This time, he is going through some kind of experiment and going into a micro-universe, and all the songs are about the different worlds he encounters on his journey. This album, Dimension Hatros, is considered by some the best Voivod album. Some people call it one of the greatest heavy metal albums of all time. Of course, if you're a fan of Voivod, your tastes are going to be a little bit different from the average person. This also sees the band continuing on with what they started on the last album. Some might say it's getting more polished, and they're getting better at it. They're getting more tighter and in sync with one another. Some of the band members I know consider this the band at their peak. So Dimension Hatros there, you should check that one out if you definitely want to hear where Voivod were at the top of their game in their youth. 1989, and they signed with MCA and Mechanic Records, and they put out Nothing Face. Now this, by some people, is considered one of the most interesting and best progressive metal albums ever. It is really yet another step forward. These last three albums, Killing Technology, Dimension Hatros, Nothing Face, the band is just going through leaps into this new style. One of the tracks on here is a cover of Pink Floyd's Astronomy Domine. It was a kind of minor hit for them. This is, I think, if not one of their more recent albums, this is probably their best-selling album. 300,000 copies at the time. And this is often considered where the band was just simply at their peak. What can I say? You've got to hear these last three albums here, this one and the two others before that, if you really want to know what Voivod were like at their absolute best. Nothing Face. So what happens next is the band tour with Rush in Canada. Then they tour in the US with Faith No More and Soundgarden. Faith No More and Soundgarden are just the opening acts and not so well known at the beginning of the tour, but by the end of it, both bands are really becoming huge. Voivod recognized there is a change in this music scene, and they've got to do something about it. So they hire former rush producer Terry Brown to produce the next album and go into the studio once more. However, they decide to do things quite differently, and as well with Terry Brown's touch, the sound of the band is really changing. Bass player Blackie is not keen on it, and he quits the band before the album is released, but after finishing his recording. So in 1991, the band releases Angel Rat. I'm afraid the case is a bit scratched here because I bought this used. It's hard to see. But anyway, Angel Rat, and this is a really different album. This is the most different album of all the albums in the Voivod catalog. This is more like an alternative rock, college radio rock type album. It still does have some intense heavy parts here and there. It still maintains some of the progressive parts, but there is more actual proper singing on here. The kind of punk rock, hardcore punk rock vocal styles that we heard earlier on in the band are now gone. The total intense thrash metal aspect is almost entirely gone. Except for maybe in one track slightly. So very, very different. A lot of fans confused, and of course the band later on have been different opinions. Some saying that this is the way they wanted the album to sound at the time. Others saying, well, yeah, maybe we should have thought about doing things a little bit differently, but there was no more money to redo the mix, so whatever. Anyway, Angel Rat, a lot of people in hindsight say that this is actually a really good album. It's just it's very different from the traditional Voivod sound. No bass player. The band decide they are not going to hire a full-time bass player, but they hire in a session player named Pierre Saint-Jean, and he is the only person to ever play on a Voivod album, I think, as a regular member who was not officially a regular member, therefore he didn't get a nickname. The album they released in 1993 is The Outer Limits. Some people call this a masterpiece of progressive metal. They kept some of the melodies and some of the ideas that they had on Angel Rat. They brought back in more of the kind of metal sound or metal riffing in some songs. And most importantly, they did their longest track ever, the 17-minute Jack Luminous, which some people consider the best Voivod song ever. This is actually, though, a really terrific album, and it is not as harsh and intense as some of the earlier stuff. So if you don't want to be totally driven into the ground or steamrolled over, you want something a little bit easier on the ears, this is probably a good place to start with Voivod, because you hear the band's progressive metal abilities, you hear some of their more on a lighter side and so on. It's just a good variety of stuff on this album. Very nice, The Outer Limits. Okay. What happens after this, though, is that with changes in the scene and the kind of popular side of metal going under, vocalist Snake gets frustrated with things, and he just decides that he's not happy with the way things are going, and he apologizes to the bandmates and says he needs some time off, but encourages them to continue without him. So we are now down to we're now down to Piggy and Away, of the two founding members of the band, and they need a bass player and a vocalist, so they get both in one fellow by the name of Eric Forrest, or he gets the nickname of E-Force, as a member of Voivod, and Voivod is now a trio. They go into the studio and pop out this album here, Negatron. This is an album that takes them back to being heavy again, but this time a little bit of the influence from the industrial metal side and a little bit of influence from the groove metal side. This album is very different. Eric's vocals are more of the kind of almost screamo, harsh metal vocal styles. Very different sounding. Again, the band has taken on a new sound and exploring a new direction, but has some really good songs on here. I think Insect, Project X, and Nanoman, the first three tracks, are often considered some of the best. Just very nice, pretty solid, heavy stuff. However, in 1998, I think they got just a little bit better with this one here, Voivod Phobos. This is similar in style, but it is just a little bit heavier and darker, and I believe they also recorded with analog equipment. There are some also interesting effects on here. Some effects person, I don't remember from where, Montreal or something, put in all these like weird kind of spacey and kind of like a nano type sound effects on here. This is actually a return of the Voivod character. We are now exploring further his experiment voyage in Dimension Hatros. This continues that journey on here. This actually is an album I really like. It's maybe one of my top, I don't know, 7 Voivod albums. I really like that it is very different. Whatever they did on Negatron, I feel that they really found their sound here with Phobos. All right. After this, they release a compilation album. By the way, there was a Best of Voivod album released in 1992 by Noise Records, which included songs from their first 6 albums, just so you know, but nothing really new. So, you know, just as a compilation, anyway, it's there. But it's probably hard to get these days. I don't know. Anyway, let's move along to this compilation here. This is called Chronic. Now, it is a compilation album, but it is not a rehash of things. First of all, we have the first 3 tracks, Forlorn, Nanoman, and Mercury, are all tracks from the previous 2 albums that were remixed in an industrial style. I don't particularly like them very much. However, the next 4 tracks, Vortex, Drift, Erosion, and Ion, are all never-before-heard tracks featuring the E-Force lineup of the trio of Voivod there. Some of these songs are really terrific. The song Ion was also included in the soundtrack for the heavy metal movie 2001. And then finally we have 4 live tracks here of the trio with E-Force singing Project X, Cosmic Conspiracy, Astronomy Domine, and Nuclear War, which was off their first album. If you are a really big fan of the band and you already have all of their other albums, this is nice to get those, especially those extra 4 E-Force songs that are on here, which is the reason why I got it, to kind of complete the collection. After this, the band released a live album called Voivod Lives, which is, again, the trio there with E-Force singing. And during this time here, 1998, they suffered a terrible motor vehicle accident in Germany, putting Eric in severe hospital problems. He almost was not going to walk again, but he did manage to be able to do that on his own. There were some lawsuits. The band was trying to keep themselves going. They actually did record material for another album, but then Piggy and Away talked about it and just decided the band has kind of lost its momentum and we're going to shut it down. So they had a meeting with E-Force and told them we are closing down Voivod for now and letting the band rest. And so E-Force went off, started his own band called E-Force, and Voivod was taking a break for a bit there. However, drummer Away did the artwork for a Dave Grohl album, and Snake did the vocals on the same album, and somehow this kind of got the band talking, and Snake was very eager to get back in with Voivod again, so Snake, Piggy, and Away decided to reform the band, and they call in Jason Newsted, who was just recently out of Metallica. He got the name Jasonic, the new lineup was born, they recorded in Jason's studio, Chop House Studios, and came out with their next album, their 10th studio album. This was simply titled Voivod. Once again, the band's sound has changed. This still keeps their science fiction theme. It still keeps some of those odd dissonant chords that Piggy really likes to use. But there's a bit of dust on here. But the sound of the band has changed once again, and this time I think it's a little bit closer to the Motorhead style, but with, of course, the Voivod feel to it. Alright, this is a triumphant return for the band. The band are feeling very good about themselves. A lot of people put this album lowest in their ranking of Voivod albums, and they say, once again, it is not because it is a bad album. It has some great tracks on it, but the main problem they have with it is just that it is, once again, very different from the sound you would normally expect from Voivod. Some people, though, rate this album rather highly. I've been enjoying it very much recently, but there you go, Voivod, self-titled 10th album. The band then, on a really big high, decide that the next album is going to be a double album, and Piggy goes and records all his guitar parts, and then he gets diagnosed with advanced stages of colon cancer, and then in 2005 he passes away. The band is devastated. However, before he passes away, he is able to call up drummer Away to the hospital and go through all of the tracks, everything he had stored on his laptop, and tell him what he had in mind for the songs. The band is in a terrible state, sort of course, very sad for losing Piggy, but they decide they've got to go ahead and honor him and all the effort he put in to make sure that it doesn't all go to waste, and put out one more Voivod album. And that turns out to be this one here, called 14. Spelled phonetically with K-A-T-O-R-Z, but pronounced 14 as in the French number for 14, 14. Anyway, this here is a terrific album. The band uses Piggy's instructions to go ahead and make all the songs here. There is Jason Newsted, J-Sonic, Snake and Away, everybody together. It is an album similar to the style of the previous one, but I actually enjoy this one slightly more. By the way, it is called 14. It is their 11th studio album. They had the 3 other albums though, the live album, the Chronic album we talked about, and the best of albums. So that's why it is actually their 14th official release. Good stuff. Some songs have these strange endings, like with just some weird sounds, computer type sounds, and a little bit of guitar and so on. I don't know why they decided to do that, but anyway, overall a killer album. Probably the opening track, The Getaway, is one of the best, one of my personal favorites. Trying to keep the speed up here. So after 14, the band decide to again be inactive for a little while. However, they still have another album's worth of material to work with, and so they've put together the final album featuring Piggy's guitar work. This is Infini, released in 2009. Also Jason Newsted playing bass on this one here. This album, yeah, basically continues in the style of the other ones. Somehow I feel the sound has changed a little bit. Perhaps also the color of the album makes me associate the sound with this color for some reason, but still some great songs on here. These 3 albums with Jason Newsted are often ranked fairly low in Voivod album ranking videos and lists. However, everybody still agrees that there are some great songs on them, and I think so too. So that ends the Voivod collection there with Piggy on guitar, and as well Jason Newsted decides he's got to take a step back from music for a while, so he leaves the band. In order to play some shows, they get a younger guitarist by the name of Daniel Mongrain, who's played with Martyr and Cryptopsy and Gorguts and so on, all these big bands in the in the Quebec technical death metal scene and so on. And as well, Blackie is seen performing on stage with Daniel sometimes, so they do some shows with him, and then after a while they finally decide the band is working very well. Daniel gets the name Chewy, becomes an official member of the band. The new lineup is born with Chewy on guitar, Snake on vocals, Away on drums, and Blackie is back on bass. And they record a new album which they release in 2013. It is called Target Earth, and this sees the band returning to their more kind of familiar traditional sound from the late 80s. Of course, the sound is a little bit different because it's now 2013. However, we do have this, again, this kind of thrash speed metal sound, this progressive metal sound. We get this strong bass breaks that were very common on the earlier albums. And this really feels like Voivod have returned to form. Yes, they don't have Piggy on guitar. However, Chewy does such a fantastic job of playing in Piggy's style because he really was a fan of Voivod ever since he was a young lad of about 11 years old. So he learned how to play guitar by playing Voivod songs. So the band is doing really well. However, after the release of this album here, there are some complications in the Voivod camp. Blackie is once again not happy about it, and he parts from the band, leaving them having to find a bass player to fill up their live dates. They get in a guy called Dominique Laroche, and again, he's supposed to be just a temporary person. However, he fits in really well, and in fact, he is also a childhood friend of Chewy. So he becomes a permanent member of the band, and he goes by the name of Rocky. The next thing that they release then, under the new lineup, with Snake on vocals, Chewy on guitar, Rocky on bass, and Away on drums, is an EP of 5 songs called Post Society. I do not have the EP as an EP, however I have it as a bonus disc on the next album that came after that, which is this one here, The Wake. Now, this is a 2018 release. This album was absolutely huge. It won the band a Juno Award for metal and hard music in 2019. The Juno Award, of course, being the top music award in Canada. The band's sound on here is just terrific. A lot of people ranking Voivod albums place this up in the top 4 or 5. Everyone I've heard who have reviewed it have said it is just phenomenal. The band are really exploring their progressive side here. Progressive metal album, lots of these kind of weird time signatures and riffs as well. The songs are a little bit longer, more developed, moving into different parts, kind of like what they were doing before, but just even more advanced. A lot of people are saying that it's absolutely amazing that at this age and stage of the game, the band is able to put out such a fantastic album of fresh material. That's 2018, The Wake, and this edition here comes with a bonus disc featuring the Post Society EP I mentioned, as well as live recordings from the 70,000 Tons of Metal cruise. That brings us up to this year here, 2022, and the band released their 15th full-length studio album called Synchro Anarchy. This album, again, the same lineup that we've had now for the last, as was on The Wake and Post Society. This here is, again, similar to the sound that we've been hearing over the last few albums. However, once more, the band seemed to be taking it in a slightly different direction and bringing out an album of really fresh material, nothing that sounds recycled, a lot of things you would expect to hear now from Voivod, as we've heard the last couple of albums, but still from a fresh angle. This album is getting lots of great reviews from people out there. Some people saying it might actually be even better than The Wake, other people saying not as good as The Wake, but still really worth listening to. And the song that you might hear off of this here, there is this, what is it called, Paranormalium, as well as Planet Eaters, which are two songs that you can find, I think, videos for on YouTube. And there you go. That is my very quick walk through the discography of Voivod. So, if you are new to Voivod and you want to check something out, please do. Pick whichever album you think sounded good out of this list here. And if you want to know a lot more about the band, you can take time to go through my previous videos talking about Voivod. And that is where I'm going to wrap it up for today. And hopefully I'm going to come back with another shorter video in the not too far future. So thank you all for watching, and hey, Voivod! I said that in the last video at the end too. Anyway, thanks everyone.